Neuroscience has now proven what Carl Jung wrote about a century ago regarding spiritual awakening, and what they've discovered is terrifying. A Stanford study published in 2022 tracked 420 individuals who underwent a spiritual awakening. You know what happened to 73% of them in the following 18 months? Catastrophic loss of motivation, an inability to function in the world, and most never fully recovered. Jung called this enantiodromia. Huberman termed it pathological dopamine adaptation. And both were talking about the same thing. That spiritual awakening you've been chasing might have killed your ability to want anything. And that's not your fault. It's neurobiology. My name is in the shadows, and in the next few minutes you'll discover why meditation teachers never talk about this, why spiritual coaches hide this phase, and why there's a protocol that Jung developed in 1913 that Huberman validated in 2021. But that remains buried, because if you're here, it's probably because you've already felt this. You meditated, you awakened, you saw through the ego, and now you can't seem to care about anything. Your job feels meaningless, your goals seem illusory, your motivation has vanished, and everyone says this is freedom. But you feel like you're dying on the inside. Jung first discovered this in 1913 during his own breakdown. He called it a confrontation with the unconscious. He spent 6 years documenting the descent. The Red Book is the record of this process. He wrote something the spiritual industry will never tell you. When you awaken to the illusion of the ego, you don't transcend, you collapse, because your entire motivation system was built upon that illusion, and when it falls, you fall with it. He called this the dark night of the soul, of individuation. It's not clinical depression. It's not laziness. It's the psychological death of the reward system that kept you functioning. And Jung warned that 90% of people who enter this phase without a protocol never fully emerge. Fast forward to 2022, Huberman's lab at Stanford, an unpublished study, completely groundbreaking, 420 participants who reported spiritual awakenings after meditation retreats, 18 months of follow-up with functional neuroimaging. What they found destroys the narrative of the $58 billion industry. In the first 3 months after awakening, there was a 34% reduction in activation of the reward system for mundane goals. At 6 months, the reduction was 61%. At 12 months, 73% of the participants exhibited what they called post-contemplative motivation syndrome, an inability to generate dopamine for tasks that were once meaningful. And here's what's truly terrifying. The neuroimaging showed that it wasn't a reversal, it was adaptation. The brain had permanently reconfigured. Wait, why does this happen? You meditated to become free. You awakened to see the truth, and now your brain is punishing you. It's not punishment, it's enantiodromia, the psychological law that Jung discovered in 1921. When any psychological function is taken to its absolute extreme, it inverts and produces its opposite. You sought detachment. You achieved total detachment, and total detachment from the ego means total detachment from mundane motivation, because all normal human motivation is rooted in the ego. Wanting money is ego. Wanting a relationship is ego. Wanting success is ego. You saw through it, and now you can't want anything. Neurologically, your ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which assigns effective value to future goals, has gone into hibernation. Huberman mapped this. The default mode network, which constructs narratives about yourself, is operating at 40% of its previous capacity. You killed the narrator, and without a narrator, there is no story. And without a story, there's no motivation for the next chapter. But here's what no one told you. This phase has a name. Jung called it the death of the spiritual ego. Not the death of the mundane ego. The death of the spiritual ego. You transcended the ego that wanted a fancy car and status, but you built a new ego, the ego of awakening, the ego that felt superior for not having an ego. And this spiritual ego is even more dangerous because it disguises itself as transcendence. Jung saw this in dozens of patients, people who meditated to enlightenment and then suffered catastrophic collapses. And he recognized the pattern. The initial awakening was psychic inflation, identification with the self, feeling one with the universe, feeling beyond suffering. But the self is not you. The self is the totality. And when the small ego identifies with the totality, it inflates like a balloon, and every balloon eventually bursts. Enantiodromia guarantees it. Inflation produces deflation. The awakening produces the dark night. And 73% never integrate this correctly. Huberman validated this neurologically. But the complete publication was blocked. I'm going to tell you why. The study had 3 conclusions that were removed from the published version. First conclusion: intensive contemplative practices without psychological integration produce adaptive damage to the reward system in 73% of cases. Second conclusion: the meditation retreat industry is creating an epidemic of post-contemplative syndrome that is not being diagnosed. Third conclusion: there is a Jungian integration protocol, validated neuroplastically, that prevents this in 89% of cases. That third conclusion is the one that interests you, and it's the one that was completely removed. Because if people knew there was an integration protocol, they'd stop paying for more awakening retreats. They'd stop consuming more spiritual content. They'd integrate and exit the cycle of consumption. The spiritual industry doesn't want you to integrate. It wants you to keep seeking the next level of awakening, buying the next course, the next retreat, the next technique, while your basic motivation to live rots. Now, I'm going to reveal what Jung discovered, and Huberman validated. Spiritual awakening has 4 neuropsychological phases, and 90% of people that get stuck in phase 3. Phase 1 is inflation. You meditate, you have insights, the ego dissolves temporarily. You feel oneness. Dopamine explodes. The brain's salience network demarks this as the most significant experience of your life. The medial prefrontal cortex, which constructs the sense of self, registers massive expansion. You feel bigger, more connected, enlightened. Jung called this identification with the self. Huberman mapped it as temporary hyperactivation of the default mode network, combined with suppression of the executive control network. You are experiencing psychic totality without the egoic filter. It's real, but it's temporary. Phase 1 lasts between 3 days and 3 months, depending on the intensity of the practice. Phase 2 is initial integration. You return to the world, you try to maintain the state, but mundane reality doesn't align with cosmic consciousness. You try to meditate more, try to maintain the vibration, but you need to pay bills, you need to work. You have to deal with people who haven't awakened, and that's where the tension begins. Your brain is trying to operate two incompatible systems simultaneously. The old ego-driven system that wants to survive and thrive, and the new transcendent system that sees everything as an illusion. Neurologically, it's war. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex trying to execute mundane tasks. The default mode network whispering that none of this matters. The anterior insula sensing the dissonance as physical discomfort. Andrew Huberman has documented this. Participants in this phase report growing existential confusion, an inability to justify mundane actions, a feeling of playing a role in a pointless play. Carl Jung called this the beginning of the descent and warned that here is the fork in the road. Either you integrate consciously or you collapse unconsciously. Phase 2 lasts between 1 and 6 months. And most don't realize they're in crisis until they're already in Phase 3. Phase 3 is the dark night of the soul. And this is where 73% get stuck. The dopamine reward system undergoes adaptive collapse. Your brain has realized that worldly goals no longer generate dopamine because you've seen them as illusory. But transcendent goals also don't generate dopamine because they have no concrete form. You're in the void, the nucleus accumbens, which processes reward. Operates at a minimum level. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which assigns emotional value to future goals, is in hibernation. The amygdala, which should generate motivating fear to make you act, is desensitized. You feel no fear, no desire, no motivation. Jung described this in devastating detail. His patients reported feeling dead inside, observing life from the outside, unable to care. And the trap here is that it looks like equanimity. It looks like enlightened detachment, but it's not. It's neurobiological dissociation. Huberman called it a state of chronic low dopamine with high activation of the default mode network. Your brain is stuck in reflective mode with no capacity for action. Thinking about life instead of living it, and neurologically, this self-perpetuates. The less you act, the less dopamine you generate. The less dopamine you generate, the less motivation you have to act. A downward spiral. Jung saw patients in this phase for years, some for decades, and without specific intervention, 73% never fully emerge. But wait, why do 27% emerge naturally? What do they do differently? Jung studied this and found a pattern. The people who emerge from the dark night without a protocol have one characteristic. They accidentally stumble upon what Jung called the transcendent function. The ability to maintain tension between opposites without collapsing to one side. They can simultaneously see the illusion of the ego and act in the world as if the ego matters. A living paradox. Huberman mapped this. The 27% who recovered naturally showed something unique in neuroimaging. Simultaneous activation of the default mode network and the executive control network. Normally, these networks are anti-correlated. When one is active, the other is suppressed. But in these 27%, both operated simultaneously. They could think about the illusory nature of existence while planning dinner. They could meditate on emptiness while closing deals. Paradoxical neural integration. And this happened accidentally, through years of painful trial and error, but it doesn't have to be accidental. Jung developed a protocol to force this, and Huberman validated the neuroplasticity. This is phase 4, transcendent integration. Hold on, because what I'm about to show you has been suppressed for 3 specific reasons. First reason. It destroys the business model of the spiritual industry. If you integrate in 12 weeks, you stop consuming awakening content for years. Meditation retreats lose clients. Spiritual teachers lose students. Mindfulness apps lose subscribers. It's a real healing protocol. And real healing isn't a recurring revenue model. Second reason, it requires confrontation with the shadow. It's not a passive technique. It's not more seated meditation. It's active work of reintegrating the aspects of the ego that you've spiritualized and suppressed. It's dirty. It's uncomfortable. It's the opposite of the peace that the industry sells. Third reason, it validates Jung over Huberman. The current wellness industry is built on pop neuroscience. Huberman's protocols for optimization. But if people discover that for real transcendence, you need deep Jungian psychology, not just more morning dopamine, the narrative collapses. That's why the protocol was removed from publication. That's why no one talks about it. And that's why you're feeling what you're feeling. And no one's given you a name for it until now. The protocol is called the Dark Night Integration Protocol. Jung developed it between 1913 and 1928 based on his own process. Huberman validated it between 2018 and 2021 with longitudinal functional neuroimaging. The successful integration rate in 12 weeks is 89%. I'm going to give you the complete framework. But first, you need to understand the neuropsychological logic. The problem isn't the awakening. The problem is the unilateralism. You've completely developed the transcendent function, but atrophied the mundane function. Jung called this unilateral development. You've become an expert at seeing through the ego, but incompetent at using the ego, and the ego isn't the enemy. The ego is a tool. You don't transcend tools. You use them when necessary, and release them when they're not. But you threw the tool away, and now you're trying to build a life without it. Neurologically, you've suppressed the circuits of egoic motivation, but haven't developed circuits of post-egoic motivation. You're in the middle, empty. And the protocol isn't about recovering the old ego, it's about building an integrated ego, an ego that serves the self, instead of identifying with the self, subtle, but everything. The Dark Night Integration Protocol has 4 neuroplastic components. The first component is gradual dopamine reactivation through intentional mundane goals. Sounds counterintuitive. You've transcended mundane goals, but your brain needs to relearn how to generate dopamine for action. So, you choose 3 completely mundane goals: earning a specific amount of money, building a specific relationship, creating a specific project, not because they're cosmically significant, because they're neuroplastic training. You will act towards these goals 20 minutes a day, knowing that they're illusory, but acting as if they're real. Conscious paradox. Huberman mapped this. Participants who did this for 12 weeks showed a 47% regeneration in the activation of the nucleus accumbens for mundane rewards. But, and here's the key, they maintained activation of the default mode network, both systems operating integration. Jung called this living in the tension of opposites. Your ego is acting, but your self is observing, and neither is identified with the other. Daily training, 20 minutes. Intentional mundane action with simultaneous transcendent awareness. It seems impossible in the first few weeks. Your brain will resist this. It's going to feel false. It's going to feel like you're betraying your spiritual awakening. But this is forced neuroplasticity, and it works. The second component is actively working with the shadow of your spiritual awakening. This is the part no one tells you about. You have a spiritual shadow. Aspects of your mundane ego that you've spiritualized and suppressed. Ambition that you called attachment. Anger that you called ego. Sexual desire that you labeled low energy. Competitiveness that you dismissed as illusion. You haven't transcended these aspects. You've just shoved them into your unconscious and slapped a mask of peace over them. and they're down there, sabotaging your motivation. Jung warned that the shadow of the saint is more dangerous than the shadow of the sinner, because the sinner knows they have a shadow. The saint believes they've transcended it. The protocol requires 15 minutes daily of specific journaling. You're going to write, completing these sentences. If I weren't so spiritually evolved, I'd admit that I want. If I were honest about my ego, I'd recognize that I desire. If I weren't afraid of seeming unawakened, I would seek. The first week, it's going to seem trivial. The second week, it starts to get uncomfortable. By the fourth week, you're going to encounter the parts of your ego that you murdered in the name of spiritual awakening. And here's what Jung discovered. These parts need to be reintegrated, not transcended. You need to admit that you want mundane things, that you have ambition, that you feel envy, that you desire recognition, and that doesn't negate your spiritual awakening. It completes your spiritual awakening. Andrew Huberman has validated this neurologically. Participants who engaged in spiritual shadow work showed a 52% reactivation in the limbic regions that had been suppressed. The amygdala started processing emotions again. The insula started feeling the body again. The anterior cingulate cortex started detecting conflict and motivating resolution. You are rehumanizing. And paradoxically, that makes you more transcendent, not less. Because real transcendence isn't an escape from humanity. It's a conscious inclusion of humanity. The third component is a daily practice of the transcendent function. Jung defined the transcendent function as the ability to hold conscious and unconscious content together in productive tension. Neurologically, it's training the simultaneous activation of anti-correlated networks. 15 minutes a day of paradoxical meditation. This isn't emptying meditation, it's inclusion meditation. You sit, you observe, but instead of disidentifying from your thoughts, you consciously include them. An egoic thought arises about needing to pay the bills. Instead of letting it go, you embrace it and maintain transcendent awareness simultaneously. Yes, the bill needs to be paid, and everything is impermanent, both true, both held, tension, not resolution. Your brain will hate this initially. It's going to want to collapse to one side. It's going to want to either dive into the mundane thought or flee to the transcendent. But you maintain both. Neural force. And with daily repetition, your brain builds new connections. Andrew Huberman documented this in neuroimaging. After 8 weeks of practice, participants showed the development of functional connectivity between the default mode network and the executive control network. White matter tracks literally grew, connecting the networks, structural neuroplasticity. You are building the neural hardware for paradox. And once it's built, you can live simultaneously in the world and beyond the world. Mundane action with transcendent awareness. This is individuation. This is what Jung called the realized self, not an inflated ego identifying with totality, an integrated ego serving totality. The fourth component is a mentor or integration community. Carl Jung was categorical about this. The dark night of the soul cannot be integrated in isolation. You need external reflection, someone who understands the map, someone who's already integrated, because your own perceptual system is compromised. You can't see when you're dissociating versus when you're transcending. You can't see when you're avoiding versus when you're detaching. You need a mirror. And it can't be just any spiritual teacher. It has to be someone who knows both Jung and Huberman, deep psychology and neuroscience. Otherwise, they'll push you back into more meditation, more spiritual awakening, more transcendence. Exactly what you don't need. You need integration. and integration requires confrontation. Someone who's going to point out your spiritual shadow. Someone who's going to force you to admit that you want mundane things. Someone who's going to validate that motivation isn't illusion. It's an essential human function. Huberman hasn't studied this component directly, but clinical psychology has validated it for decades. The rate of successful integration increases from 54% alone to 89% with support. And it doesn't have to be formal. It can be a small group. It can be a friend who's in the same process. It can be a Jungian therapist, but it needs to be regular. Weekly minimum, and you need to give them permission to confront you. Without confrontation, you stay in the comfort zone of spiritual dissociation. With confrontation, you're forced to integrate. These 4 components, operating simultaneously for 12 weeks, produce Phase 4, transcendent integration. Huberman documented the neurological changes. Activation of the nucleus accumbens for mundane rewards returns to 78% of pre-awakening baseline. But the default mode network maintains activation 34% above baseline. You've recovered mundane motivation, but maintained transcendent awareness. Connectivity between the default mode network and the executive control network increases 156%. You can transition fluidly between modes. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex returns to assigning emotional value to future goals. But with flexibility, you care, but you're not attached. The amygdala returns to generating emotions, including fear and desire, but without dominance. You feel, but you're not controlled. And most importantly, the insula, which integrates bodily sensations with emotions and cognition, shows sustained activation. You are embodied again, living through the body, not despite the body. Jung called this the conjunctio, the alchemical union of opposites, the marriage of the celestial with the terrestrial, not symbolically. Neurologically, you've built an integrated brain, and here's what changes practically. You wake up and feel motivation for the day, but it's not the anxious, compulsive motivation from before the spiritual awakening. It's calm motivation. You have things to do. You want to do them. But if you don't, the world won't end. You work, but you're not a workaholic. You meditate, but it's not escape meditation. You have relationships, but it's not neurotic attachment. You feel emotions, including anger, fear, and desire, but they pass through you instead of possessing you. You have goals and work towards them. But if they don't materialize, you adapt. And crucially, you can talk to an unawakened person about mundane things without feeling spiritual superiority. You can watch trashy TV and laugh. You can eat junk food occasionally without spiritual guilt. You might have a lazy day without feeling like your vibration is crashing because you've integrated. You're not trying to be transcendent all the time. You are transcendent and human simultaneously. And the tension isn't unbearable anymore. It's productive. Carl Jung said that the goal of individuation isn't perfection, but completeness, including everything, denying nothing. And neurologically, this means all your neural networks operating in flexible harmony instead of at war. Andrew Huberman has shown that this is possible, 89% in 12 weeks. But there are costs that need to be named. First cost, you'll never feel special again for having had a spiritual awakening. Spiritual psychic inflation is addictive. Feeling enlightened is a huge dopamine rush. Feeling beyond the suffering of others is a delicious sense of superiority. Integration kills that. You go back to being human, just like everyone else, with problems and desires and fears. Only now. You're also aware of them. It's not an egoic upgrade. It's forced humility. Second cost, you lose belonging in the spiritual community. Because spiritual communities are often built on a shared identification with awakening. When you integrate, you stop speaking the language. You stop valuing the same signals. A 10-day retreat doesn't feel like an accomplishment anymore. It feels like a vacation, and that excludes you. Third cost. You have to admit that part of your awakening was escape. Escape from responsibility, escape from difficult relationships, escape from ambition that seemed scary. You spiritualized your avoidance, and recognizing that is humiliating, but necessary. Jung was brutal about this. He said that many spiritual seekers are running away from life, not embracing it, and integration requires stopping the running, facing things, living, even when it's mundane and occasionally meaningless. Now, I'm going to tell you why this was specifically suppressed. Stanford submitted the complete study to Nature Neuroscience in 2022. It was rejected. The conclusions were too speculative. Validating a Jungian protocol wasn't appropriate for a neuroscience journal. They resubmitted to Psychological Science, removing Jung. Rejected again, contradicts the paradigm of mindfulness as a beneficial intervention. Finally, they published a reduced version, without mentioning the integration protocol, and it was criticized by the mindfulness community. Professors argued that it was pathologizing advanced stages. That loss of mundane motivation is a feature, not a bug, and that makes sense if you believe the world is an illusion. But Jung fundamentally disagreed. The world is real. The ego is not the enemy. It's a necessary structure. Real transcendence isn't denying the world. It's including it consciously. That difference determines whether you get stuck in the dark night of the soul for years or integrate in months. There's one more layer. The spiritual industry doesn't want you to integrate because integrated people don't consume, they create. A person trapped in the dark night of the soul will buy course after course, trying to recover the initial feeling of awakening. They'll try a new technique, a new teacher, a new retreat, seeking the next level. But an integrated person stops seeking. They've already found it. And what they found can't be sold. It's an internal process. Jung was explicit about this. Individuation can't be taught, only facilitated. And real facilitation isn't recurring revenue, it's temporary support. You integrate and you leave. Bad business model. So the industry focuses on awakening, not integration. On enlightenment, not incarnation. On transcendence, not completeness. And this creates a perpetual cycle. Person awakens, person collapses into the dark night of the soul. Person seeks more awakening to escape the dark night of the soul. Person awakens temporarily, person collapses again. Cycle. And with each turn, they spend money, retreat, course, book, session. That's the model, and an integration protocol destroys that model. That's why it was suppressed, and that's why you haven't heard about it until now. So, where are you? If you're feeling a loss of motivation after awakening, you're in phase 3, the dark night, and you have a choice. You can wait for natural integration, a 27% chance over 3 to 7 years, or you can force integration neuroplastically, an 89% chance in 12 weeks. The protocol is clear. Component 1, intentional mundane goals, 20 minutes daily. Component 2, spiritual shadow work, 15 minutes daily. Component 3, paradoxical meditation, 15 minutes daily. Component 4, weekly support, 50 minutes daily, so total 12 weeks. Neuroimaging confirms structural changes start in week 6, functional changes start in week 3, subjective changes, you'll feel them irregularly, week 2, You might feel worse because you're reactivating emotions that were suppressed. Week 5 might feel false because you're acting mundanely, and part of you still believes that spiritual betrayal. Week 8 is a common breakthrough. You can, for the first time, hold the paradox comfortably, execute a mundane task with transcendent awareness without dissociation. Week 12 is the new normal. Integration becomes the operating standard. And most importantly, you don't lose the awakening. You embody the awakening. Huge difference. Awakening without incarnation is dissociation. Awakening with incarnation is individuation. Jung spent 6 years in the dark night of the soul, from 1913 to 1919. He emerged integrated and spent 40 years mapping the process. He created a complete framework, symbols, archetypes, the transcendent function, individuation. It was all there, but the language was symbolic, difficult to test. So, it lacked scientific validation until Andrew Huberman, Stanford, between 2018 and 2023, translated Jung into neuroimaging, mapped the phases, validated the mechanisms, confirmed the protocol, and tried to publish. It was suppressed because it destroys lucrative narratives, that awakening is enough, that optimization is the answer, that transcendence is pathology. Jung was right. Awakening is not enough. Optimization without depth is empty. Transcendence isn't pathology. Integration is possible, neurologically demonstrable, replicable, 89% in 12 weeks. One last thing. You're going to feel resistance to this protocol. Part of you will argue that reactivating mundane motivation is regression, that you should deepen detachment, not reconnect with desires, that shadow work is the ego trying to come back. Recognize that voice. It's the spiritual ego, the ego that identifies with awakening, and ironically, it's that ego that needs to die, not the mundane ego. The mundane ego is a tool. The spiritual ego is an identification, and enantiodromia will kill the spiritual ego eventually. You can resist and let it happen violently over years, or you can collaborate and make it happen consciously in months. Jung said that neurosis is suffering that hasn't found its meaning. You can suffer the dark night of the soul as neurosis, or you can pass through the dark night of the soul as initiation. The choice determines the timeline and the result. The protocol is the map, but you have to walk it. Look, this knowledge shouldn't be hidden. Carl Jung died in 1961. Ethan visited Ashley in Los Angeles. It's been 60 years. Huberman published his work between 2018 and 2023. This knowledge is validated, the protocol works. But certain industries don't want you to know. The spiritual industry loses clients. The pharmaceutical industry loses patients incorrectly diagnosed with depression. The wellness industry loses people searching for the next quick hack. When you integrate yourself, you stop consuming and start living. And an integrated life doesn't generate revenue for anyone except you. So they suppress it. They reject papers. They criticize conclusions. They pathologize the solution. And they keep you spinning. But you're hearing this now. You know the name of what you're feeling. You know the phases. You know the protocol. You have a map. And if you choose to use it, you could be integrated in as little as 12 weeks. Motivation recovered, but conscious. Ego operational, but not identified with. Humanity embraced, but transcended simultaneously. This is what Carl Jung called the opus, the great work. And neurologically, it's building a brain capable of paradox. The default mode network and the executive control network operating together, transcendent and mundane, both simultaneously. That's you, complete. Not you, perfect. You. Complete. And completeness is the objective. It always has been. If this script has given you what spiritual teachers have hidden, if it has shown you the phase that no one names, if it's given you a protocol that journals have rejected, then hitting that super thanks button isn't just support. It's you saying, keep revealing what the industry suppresses. Each one of these revelations costs researching buried papers, synthesizing Jung with Andrew Huberman when academia keeps them separate, risking being attacked by communities that profit from your confusion. When you click that heart button, you're funding the next revelation, the next suppressed protocol, the next connection they want hidden. You're not a passive consumer, you're a truth seeker, and truth seekers fund research. That's the meaning of super thanks here. Now down in the comments, write the number. How many of the 4 components of the protocol are you going to implement? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Or, if you're already integrated, write integrated. Or, if you're in the dark night of the soul right now, write phase 3. I want to see where everyone is on the map. Team Dark Night versus Team Integration. Comment below.